This conference will now be recorded.
Next slide. So from there, it was time to put the campaign together. The primary component across which much of the campaign revolved were quick videos to educate parents about how tobacco is changing. The videos played in cinemas, on YouTube, and on social media and websites popular with parents. So if we can, Alex, can we take a look at one of those videos?
Yeah, I'll play it right now.
Thank you.
I don't know when tobacco started changing, but man, now tobacco comes in all these new sweet flavors. Great, cotton candy, gummy bear. Tobacco's changing, parents. We've got to keep up.
And Alex, let's let play to the next one too.
Okay. As a parent, I thought I knew what tobacco looked like. I had no idea. Now a dangerous nicotine addiction comes in all kinds of shapes and candy flavors. Tobacco's changing, parents. We've got to keep up.
Great, thanks. Those next videos start really fast. So as you can see there, and this is really a through line for the whole campaign, is that the two primary messages that we've really focused on are the deceptive looks, nature, packaging of the products, and then also the variety of flavors. And as I go through additional elements of the campaign that we've launched over the course of the last few years, that's really stayed consistent. And all of our campaign materials direct the audience to tobaccoischanging.com. This is where parents can learn about the different types of tobacco products, as well as issues like flavors, packaging, and menthol. Visitors can also use the website to connect with tobacco prevention and control coalitions in their area. Next slide. Billboards featured prominently in the first round of the campaign and continue on at a local level in phase 3. This is the newest one that was developed for the campaign. Next slide, please. The billboards and video of phase 1 were supplemented by other tactics like print and African American newspapers, and this is an example of one of those ads. Next slide, please. Social media has also played a key role in the campaign since the beginning. To date, paid videos have run on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest, and this is something that has stayed consistent through every phase of the campaign. And we have seen different social media channels sort of resonate with audiences at different times depending on the message that's shown. Next slide. So the campaign is called Tobacco is Changing, and it's only appropriate that tobacco products changed in a huge way shortly after our initial launch with the rise of Juul and other pod-based products. Appropriately, we adjusted the campaign across 2 subsequent phases to keep it relevant to new tobacco trends, whether it's the rise of Juul or e-cigarette products that could be mistaken for hoodies or backpacks, nicotine toothpicks. The campaign is designed to be responsive to the ever-changing tobacco landscape. Here are some of the recent products the campaign is focusing on in its 3rd phase. And so looking at it clockwise, we have some nicotine toothpicks. We have hoodies and backpacks that have vaping devices headed right into them. And then also a smartwatch that you can vape from. So, you know, you can see it's getting sneakier. And actually, when I think about the beginning of the campaign, when parents were worried about how discreet the products were, I mean, in hindsight, these are just so much more discreet than products were back then. So it's kind of, we have to be an ever-changing campaign to really adapt. Next slide, please. Alex? Great. So here's a Facebook experience ad that we recently ran to promote the campaign earlier this summer. With this ad, we really wanted to show the crazy variety of products, many of them flavored that are still on the market. And so I would imagine that Mike or someone might talk about this, that there has been some action at the national level related to flavored e-cigarettes, but it wasn't comprehensive. There were products that slipped through the cracks. And so that's a big part of the campaign's educational message right now, is that flavored products haven't gone away. Next slide, please. So this Facebook series of ads helps familiarize parents with the new pod-based products that are hooking kids. The ad is designed to hammer home the point that tobacco products don't necessarily look like tobacco products anymore. Next slide. So here's one of our newer Facebook ads. This spotlights another device that looks like makeup compacts. So we really can't make this stuff up. It's just taking all kinds of different forms, and you have to be a little bit of a detective to be able to tell what's what. And so that's where our campaign is trying to help parents. Next slide. So I mentioned before that even though flavors were discontinued for some products, that didn't put an end to flavored e-cigarettes. Here are a couple of the products that have kind of swept in, and now there's some action being taken on these, but there are still others that will be featuring in the campaign. These products, these e-cigarettes, they're disposable, they come in a variety of flavors, and we really want to make sure that we're hitting that message hard on social media. Next slide. So new creative continues to breathe new life into the campaign. These are some of the results that we've seen from the campaign's second phase, and we're excited to build on these numbers in the campaign's upcoming second phase. In addition to strong visitation, impressions, and interaction with the elements of our media campaign, Tobacco is Changing also scored really well in a 2019 post-campaign survey of parents in Milwaukee and Wausau that was conducted this summer. Next slide, please. And here are some of the things that are coming up with the campaign. We are in the process of working on some new videos. We're also focus group testing some new ad concepts, and we're really going to focus in on the nature of these products, how they can be camouflaged to look like other things, and flavored disposable e-cigarettes. That's really, those are going to be two of the big cornerstones of the campaign as we move forward. And like I said earlier, the campaign is called Tobacco is Changing. The reality is that tobacco is always changing, so there'll kind of always be a need for this campaign. The messages might change a little bit, but really the industry tactics and the industry manipulation are staying just as relevant. And so the campaign, unfortunately, there seems to be plenty of need for the campaign going forward. Next slide. So I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to present today. I always love talking about the campaign. And we can either, Alex, I think you said we could open it up for questions, or do we want to hold those for everybody at the end?
Yeah, so Annika and I were thinking that we can open up the questions for your presentation and Luke's after Luke's presentation.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, with that, I can happily hand it off to Luke. Thanks, everybody.
All right. All right, Luke.
Fantastic. Thank you, Spencer and Alex. And also Annika, for the opportunity to be able to present to you information that we've collected in the Wisconsin Youth Tobacco Survey that was conducted in 2018. You might be asking, well, wait, it's 2020. Shouldn't we have new data? And the answer to that is yes. However, because of COVID-19, the work that was being done in the field to collect that data had to be suspended and then unfortunately subsequently canceled. So all the remarks and data that I'll be sharing with you today is from 2018. And with Spencer's presentation, it's really easy to tell how we've seen a huge increase and a rise to epidemic proportions in e-cigarette use among our youth in Wisconsin. Like I mentioned, the data that I'm going to share is from the Youth Tobacco Survey. The Youth Tobacco Survey is conducted Every other year on the even number years, it is given to middle schoolers and high schoolers. So we're looking at grades 6 through 12. I'll start with the middle school data that we collected and then transition over into the high school. But the survey really digs down to collect information on youth knowledge, beliefs, and behaviors related to tobacco use and vaping products. Some of the questions are provided to us by CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and then some of them are written with guidance from a team as well as the Department of Health Services Tobacco Prevention and Control Program. So let's just get right into the data. While the presentation today focuses on e-cigarettes, some of my comments will be on e-cigarettes, and then some will also be kind of a general look at what the data says about youth use of tobacco use overall. So as you can see over on the left-hand side of the screen, while the overall rates of e-cigarette use is in middle school is not as high as it is in high school, although you cannot see the high school rates at this time. It'll be on a different slide. But what is incredibly significant is that percentage increase, 272% increase in e-cigarette use among middle schoolers between the years of 2014 and 2018. And that's represented by that very sharply steep red line going from 1.1 in 2014 to 4.1 in 2018. If you take a look over at the right-hand side of the screen, what you're going to see is current use with the blue bar and ever use with the black bar. Current use is once, at least youth reporting that they have used a product at least once in the past 30 days. And ever use, just like it sounds, is ever use of the product. So when you kind of drill down here, you see that electronic cigarettes dominates the use amongst tobacco products for middle schoolers. Your conventional cigarettes are next, and then you can see further on down the line as to how popular other products are. Next slide. So if part of data, and I do have to give props to Emily Gunovich, who is on the line, and if there's any questions that I'm unable to answer, she will be able to step in and answer them. She was responsible for the look of this fact sheet and has done a fantastic job being able to take the data that doesn't necessarily always look very pretty and put them into graphics that are easily understood, especially for people like me and others who like things in graphic form, percentage form. So it really provides a variety of different ways of looking at the data. So if you're wondering and looking for another way to communicate how the number of youth who have ever tried an e-cigarette, that top graphic really helps with that visual where it's 1 in 9 Wisconsin middle schoolers have ever tried an e-cigarette. When you dig down a little bit deeper into the data, you're going to start seeing things related to age of initiation. 96%, almost all of those who took the survey, or who reported ever using tobacco, said that they tried an e-cigarette before they were the age of 13. Experimentation also stands out in this slide, where almost half of the ever users, so those who have ever taken at least one puff or have tried a tobacco product, even if it's just once, said that they started with an e-cigarette. So it's really that first product that they're starting with and then becoming addicted to the nicotine. And then obviously the flavor, Spencer touched on it a lot. A lot of the campaign for the Tobacco is Changing campaign is focused around the flavoring and packaging. And with 95% of middle schoolers reporting that they would not use an unflavored tobacco product, those flavors are a dead giveaway as to why they are so popular. Next slide. We'll still stay with the middle school population. We took a look at secondhand smoke, as it still is a concern for us as to the exposure of young people around secondhand smoke. And the data showed that secondhand smoke exposure still is significant, and roughly 1 in 5 middle schoolers are reporting exposure to secondhand smoke, whether it be in their own home or whether it be in a vehicle that they rode in within the last week. Then there's a couple of call outs here. One thing that really stands out to me is the access one. Even in middle school, so think about middle schoolers, 6th through 8th grade, you might have one of your own or might know of one related to one, but 6th to 8th graders, 41% of them actually reported that they said it was easy to get their hands on tobacco products. So it really is quite shocking when you're thinking about how young the population is that's taking the survey. So you can see the other call outs here on this fact sheet as well. A couple of them related to knowledge level and really shows the work that is paying off both at the local, state, and national level for that counter marketing to really make sure that young people are fully aware that all tobacco products are dangerous. Okay, if we could get the next slide, we'll focus over onto the high school population. So this is going to look really familiar to the middle school one. However, it is focused on the high school, grades 9 through 12. Over on the left-hand side, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody, but just like we saw a dramatic increase and rise in e-cigarette use with middle schoolers, we're seeing it in high school as well. 1 in 5 high schoolers are current e-cigarette users. And also to note, over on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see 1 in 3, nearly 1 in 3 high school students that were surveyed reported ever using an electronic cigarette. That's very significant when you're looking at the number of young people who are even just trying it even once. But another thing to look at is different from our middle schoolers and the data that came back from their reports. Instead of conventional cigarettes, so your Marlboros, your Newports, conventional cigarettes were actually 3rd in popularity amongst high school students. Cigars and cigarillos came in 2nd. And while the YTS didn't dig deeper as to why that specifically was the case, the best guess that we have is like Spencer alluded to, the connection between how cheap, accessible, and how flavored those tobacco products are, just like their e-cigarette counterparts. All right, so the next slide will go into a little bit more detail about the high schoolers and what the data came back as. Mentioned before, 1 in 5 high schoolers are current e-cigarette users. And another thing that popped out from the data is that 1 in 4, so dual use. Dual use is a concern. Dual use is using more than one tobacco product in a given month. And for those e-cigarette users, 16% of those who indicated that they were e-cigarette users also smoke a conventional cigarette. And so while the e-cigarette manufacturers are touting their products as cessation devices or an alternative to other tobacco products, the concern for our young people using more than one tobacco product was validated based off of the information that we received from the survey. And just like their middle school counterparts, high schoolers also are attracted to the tobacco products because of the flavors, with almost 9 out of 10 saying that they would not use an unflavored tobacco product, that flavors are very important to the use. And speaking of flavors, when you're looking at the bottom right-hand corner, that call out talking about menthol as an additive, specifically added in from the tobacco industry, the data shows that more than half of current smokers are using mentholated and menthol flavored cigarettes. Reports have shown as a flavor additive, mentholated tobacco products are easier to use and harder to quit. So having that information is incredibly important, knowing how prevalent menthol use is, especially within cigarettes. And so yeah, so next slide. Actually, I think, yep, one more slide. We looked at just like we did with middle schoolers, the secondhand smoke exposure is relatively the same, a little bit higher in vehicles, but 19% exposed at home and 24% exposed in vehicles within the last week. So secondhand smoke exposure still important to focus on. A couple of the call outs on this slide in the circles. Access, again, if you remember before, access to tobacco products for middle schoolers was in the 40s for their accessibility, saying that it's easy to get their hands on a nicotine product or a tobacco product. Here in high school, that jumps up to 76%. So nearly over 3/4 of those who filled out the survey said that it was easy to get their hands on tobacco products. And then also looking at the data in the circle that's on the far right, we see that another interesting aspect of tobacco use is the high percentage of those who are currently addicted or currently reporting as regular users. They want to quit. It might not be 100%, but 40% is certainly significant enough for us to call it out. So the goal really is for us to figure out a way to reach these young people with the right quit resources that they'll actually use, and then the ones that we know that are shown to work with young people. So as stated earlier, the Wisconsin Youth Tobacco Survey provides the Tobacco Prevention and Control Program with quantitative state-specific data that assists us in tailoring specific programming to the needs of Wisconsin young people. It really is our goal to not just collect the data, but share the data and communicate the data. So the use of this statewide data coupled with other sources of local data can really guide the work of a specific coalition and the work including the work that we do as well. Our work has really made a difference and most importantly has saved many, many lives. But however, we just can't let up on the gas right now. Looking at some of the slides that Spencer has, the innovation that we've seen over the last 5 years as far as e-cigarettes and other tobacco products has been more than other innovations in decades. So we're up against a formidable and well-funded opponent, the tobacco industry, and really encourage you all to take the information and find ways what speaks to you and what speaks to the audiences that you work with that might live in your neighborhood, might go to school with your children if you have some, or are just people that you really want to get this information out to. So with that, I'll turn it back over, and I think now's the time that we're going to take some questions.
Yep, just overall, we're just going to take questions at the end of the presentation just to be conscious of time and making sure that we get all the presenters in. So our next presenter will be Dr. Mike Goodsite.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to share in this presentation today. One thing I'll say is that I really appreciate Spencer talking about the changing face of tobacco and Luke talking about the concerning increased use of tobacco products by youth, especially with e-cigarettes. And one of the advantages of not having shared our presentations with each other beforehand to get this in a timely fashion is that there will be some repetition. One of the disadvantages is there will be some repetition, but I'll be sharing some slides that you've seen already, as well as some additional ones. I'd like to focus on the Children's Wisconsin experience after I do some setup for the presentation, and really the impact that the vaping and the use of e-cigarettes had on something that occurred last year that you're familiar with, which was the realization that it was causing a significant lung injury problem. So why don't we go ahead and advance to the next slide. Thanks, Alex. Just to ground everybody in what e-cigarettes are, they're an electronic nicotine delivery system, or an ENDS, and it's basically electronic devices that are used to inhale products through a vaping process, and you can see the breakdown here as we move to the next slide. The e-cigarettes come in many different styles, and these have evolved quite a bit. So you can keep scrolling through, because I'll go through this slide pretty quickly. There are different generations. They have different delivery systems and different appearances. And then the game changer occurred as we moved to the next slide, which was the ability to have e-cigarettes or products that resemble e-cigarettes be in a format that was easily concealable. They did not resemble the previous traditional cigarettes. And as we move to the next slide, you can see that this had a significant impact. The e-liquid that is used to vaporize and form the vapor that is then inhaled contains a number of different products, some of which are understood, some of which are not understood. And one of the problems was that many of the things that we were seeing that were occurring because of the lung injury that was happening were due to illicit products that were being manufactured in a black market fashion. So e-liquid contains humectants, which are listed here, and the nicotine derived from tobacco, THC, and methamphetamine. So there are all kinds of different things that were being put into these liquids and then inhaled into the lungs. Move on to the next slide. As you have heard a couple of different times before, flavoring was really the key that had hooked people onto, hooked our youth onto these products, and literally hundreds of different types of flavors that were put into the products that were then attractive and used by the youth. So we'll move on to the next slide. The thing to remember is that the pre-filled cartridges that are in pods contain enough nicotine for the equivalent of about 1 pack of cigarettes. And as we were exploring some of the history of youth who came to Children's and presented with lung injury, some of them were using as many as 2 to 3 pods a day, which would be equivalent of 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes per day. This was an unprecedented use of nicotine in youth. Even those who smoked in the past did not have histories that would suggest that there was this much use. So that was very concerning. And as we've heard before, nicotine is extremely addictive, one of the most addictive substances known, and it is especially addictive to developing brains in adolescents, even more so than it is in adults. So we'll move on to the next slide. So why was there a focus on Juul, and what was Juul's entry into this market, and what happened? Well, in April 2018, Juul had over half of the e-cigarette market. And just to give you perspective, e-cigarettes made their first appearance in any widespread fashion in the United States in 2006. So they've only been around for about 14 years or so. About 2016 is when we saw a significant uptick in the use of e-cigarettes in youth. And Juul quickly entered this market and used strategies that have been used by tobacco industry in the past, and was able to secure a way to deliver this product that was very enticing and also very, very addictive. It was a rapid uptake, as you can see, because of the design, the easy ability to hide it. It resembled something that was recognized as harmless, a USB port, and had a very high nicotine, therefore addictive concentration. Let's move on to the next slide. Why are children using e-cigarettes? Why are youth using e-cigarettes? The primary reason is for the flavors. As you know, that Luke had stated that clearly, and it's very obvious that is the draw. The youth tobacco survey showed that 39% used it because of a friend or a family member, availability of flavors, and about 20% believe that they're less harmful than other forms of tobacco. Another thing that's really important to remember here about the distribution of this and the use of it in youth is that these products were easily available to anyone 18 years of age or older. And if you think about about high school setting, oftentimes there are friends that cross over grades. So an 18-year-old could certainly buy and distribute for those in high school in a peer group, and so they became readily distributed amongst peers. So this is a real problem in terms of the distribution and the social networking and connecting that allows these products to be shared amongst youth. We can move on to the next slide. So what is the connection between vaping and EVALI? And just to make sure that I'm not using acronyms too freely here, EVALI is e-cigarette vaping product use associated lung injury. So it's the use of vaping products and the subsequent damage to the lungs in developing youth. Let's move on to the next slide, and we'll give a bit of a history here in terms of what happened. So just about a year ago, mid-July, Children's Wisconsin worked with the Wisconsin Department of Health Services in identifying 5 healthy adolescents who had been admitted to Children's in the previous month and had some very concerning symptoms that did not seem to link to any known cause. Normally, we think about these types of symptoms as related to pneumonia, but the dyspnea, which is shortness of breath, fatigue, and hypoxemia, which is low oxygen, so difficulty breathing, shortness of breath, tiredness, and low oxygen. All of these things were puzzling at first, but they all were reported, all the youth had reported a recent history of e-cigarette use. This is a very important link, and it really is a recognition of the importance of just basic good science and using tools that are readily available, like taking a good history and a good social history. Fortunately, at Children's, we had a team of experts that were seeing this, and the team came together and noticed that this was not a pattern that was recognized in any previous history or any previous disease process. And so they began talking about it, and the only common thread was the e-cigarette use. And I would really like to call out here collaboration with Wisconsin Department of Health Services. The team there, the leadership there, and others were exceptionally helpful in working with us to try and figure out what the connection was. And we decided to share a joint message as a warning about e-cigarettes. We'll move on to the next slide. On July 25th, in conjunction with Children's Wisconsin Department of Health Services shared an alert to clinicians describing this new clinical syndrome, and that similar cases were being sent to notify public health authorities. We had 8 teens at that time that had been hospitalized with this inhalation injury, this EVALI, that seemed to be linked to some type of e-cigarette use. Let's move on to the next slide. So new cases were identified in subsequent investigations. This became much bigger than we had ever anticipated it would become. And moving along, we saw that there was more and more recognition that this was something that was happening nationally and then globally. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. The first death was associated with this EVALI inhalation injury was reported in August, so about a month after we reported it. We'll keep moving to the next slide. And this is just I'm sharing with you what we put together in terms of recognizing what was happening. So common presenting signs and symptoms, and then management that our team was putting together. So this is something that our team was doing to try to share what we were learning with others who were requesting information. We'll move on to the next slide. And then the history here is the use of e-cigarettes in the youth that we were finding them had used e-cigarettes for several months or sometimes only days beforehand. There were a variety of products, often used in combination, often unclear as to what the source was, and the source of the product was really the problem. We were seeing quite a bit of variability in terms of where they were obtained. We'll move on to the next slide. This is a striking example of what happens when vaping affects the lungs. The slide on your left, or the left-hand part of the slide, shows a clearly abnormal lung with hazing. The lung should be at that darkish color that's on the right-hand side. So this is a very stark realization of what was happening to the lungs of youth that were having these lung-associated injuries from vaping. We'll move on to the next slide. And this is done on bronchoscopy, where a tube is put down into the lungs and looked at. The left-hand side is a normal non-smoker. The middle part of the slide is the smoker, and you can see the redness and irritation in the vapor on the right-hand slide. Move on to the next. You've seen this slide, so I won't reiterate. Very concerning about the fact, that's okay, you can go to the next slide. The very concerning fact is that after years of progress in reducing the use of tobacco in youth, there's been an uptick in that, a significant uptick in that, which is very, very concerning. And then the final slide here is just our current state 1 year later. EVALI actually has all but disappeared, and we believe that's because there has been a realization that some of the illicit products that were being generated have been no longer available and no longer being used. It has been very difficult to maintain long-term follow-up in this age group, so we have some of those who are affected that we've been following, but not all of them. What we've seen is that most have recovered, although some continue to have respiratory symptoms, and our biggest concern is not just this youth group, but what happens to those who are smoking at an early age and what the long-term effects may be, which are unknown at this point in time. And so our focus remains on advocacy, education, and research. We're glad to see that EVALI has diminished, but we are very concerned about the ongoing concerns, the ongoing issues related to youth using these products. I think that's the end of my presentation, so I'll hand it over at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Goodsite. So next we will have Michael Metcalf, and he will be finishing up today.
Okay, great. I will be brief. I hope to leave some time for questions, so I'll be sure to do that. I just want to thank all of the other presenters. I think you've really teed it up for me and shown the importance of having comprehensive and evidence-based policies and regulations on these products. So I will be discussing the regulations around commercial tobacco and other tobacco products and what those look like or how they compare to regulations around e-cigarettes. And as I was kind of diving into this, I realized that tobacco regulations revolve really around important dates. And I'm going to focus on just 3 or 4 very important dates. So I'll call your attention to those and then go into more detail. So next slide. So first, I'll start with commercial tobacco products. Next slide. The date I want to call out here is June 22nd, 2009. This was when the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act was signed into law. And this gave the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, the authority to regulate tobacco products. This is a screenshot of the FDA webpage on this, and you can see with the bullet points what the Tobacco Control Act does. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these, but just to highlight a few, it restricts tobacco marketing and sales to youth. It requires smokeless tobacco product warning labels, requires disclosure of ingredients, and preserves state, local, and tribal authority. And what that means, the state, local, and tribal authority, I want to just briefly touch on. That's why you see differences in state and local laws throughout the country. For example, tax on commercial tobacco products is different throughout the country. Also the legal age one can purchase tobacco products was another one we saw here. For example, before December 2019, you had differences all across the country on the minimum age ranging from 18 to 19 to 21. And then just in December 2019, Tobacco 21 was signed into law, and the minimum age became 21 throughout the whole country. I think one important thing to call out here is, and that you don't see on the screen, is that the Tobacco Control Act prohibits flavored cigarettes except for menthol. So this shows that there are gaps, and many public health voices argue that the FDA hasn't done enough to exercise their full authority. So while it was a major step in the right direction, many arguments say that the FDA can do more in the fight against the tobacco industry and to really exercise their authority that they have. And this argument, as others have explained wonderfully, is that it's become more apparent with the emergence of electronic smoking devices that the FDA needs to exercise their authority as more and colorful and flavored products coming onto the market. Next slide. So next I'll move to electronic smoking devices. Next slide. And the date I want to highlight here is May 10th, 2016. This was when the FDA expanded its authority from the original Tobacco Control Act that I explained to also include e-cigarettes, cigars, pipe tobacco, and hookah under its authority. So essentially it expanded its line of authority to include all tobacco products. And part of that expansion included a requirement that manufacturers go through an approval process and prove that their products don't appeal to youth and are appropriate for the protection of the public health. Now you might be scratching your head a little bit here because that was 4 years ago when that came out, and you might be thinking, well, if that happened 4 years ago, then e-cigarette manufacturers and the e-cigarette market should be in control, in line, everything dandy. But we all know that that isn't the case, as others have explained. And the reason for that is complex. And we obviously don't have time to go into that today, but clearly the last 4 years with electronic cigarettes and electronic smoking devices, it's kind of been a Wild West. So with that in mind, I want to point everyone's attention to a future date, and that is September 9th of this year. And that's when manufacturers that want their product on the market, they have to submit an application to the FDA demonstrating that their product does not appeal to youth and that it is appropriate for the protection of the public health. So it'll be very interesting to see what the FDA does. Interestingly enough, just this last week, you all might have seen that the FDA came out and said that all disposable products, so Spencer and others touched on this briefly, that disposable products like Puff Bar need to remove their flavored products because they don't have the required authorization to sell those. So it still isn't immediately clear how this will play out, but it's an important step FDA is taking. Also in February of this year, the FDA, or excuse me, you might remember the current administration implemented a partial flavor ban on e-cigarettes, and this was on flavored e-cigarette pods. So think Juul or the closed cartridges, and that does not include menthol or tobacco flavors. So menthol and tobacco flavors are still available. It also doesn't restrict flavored e-liquids or the open tank system. So again, lots of gaps, and many of these products are still on the market and available today. So that was kind of a high-level overview. Again, I think moving forward, it will be very interesting to see what the FDA does come September. I was on a website, or excuse me, a webinar last week that was talking about this, and the presenter said what the FDA does come September will really have implications for good or for bad in the work we do over decades to come. So keep a close eye on that. It'll be interesting to see. So with that, I think we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, so if anybody has questions about any of the presentations, you can please put them in the chat, and then Annika will read them off to our presenters.
Yeah, so far we've got a question from Benjamin. He asked, for Spencer, how were the focus groups that you're doing for tobacco is changing? How are those happening now during COVID, and what do those look like?
Yeah, thanks, Annika. I actually used the handy dandy chat feature to answer Benjamin's question. But we're entering into the interesting world of Zoom focus groups. So I was just on. I just sat in on one last night. I'll be sitting in on some more this week. but basically just doing the focus group virtually.
Great, thanks. Benjamin, did that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
So if nobody else has any other questions, Spencer, you mentioned, just a quick note, not all disposable products were included in the FDA action that Mike noted. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, it called out some companies and products specifically, but at least last I checked, it wasn't an all-encompassing on flavor disposables. It targeted a few of the most popular ones. So even when they are trying to tie up loopholes, there are still some loopholes left behind.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer, for clarifying that. And I also believe that, you know, it doesn't mean that they could submit an application come September 9th. So there's still a lot to be seen with that.
Yep, and it doesn't preclude the FDA from sending out more letters. Just as far as the warning letters that they've sent out so far, they targeted some specific products and companies, like puff bars, like Mike mentioned.
All right, is there any final questions or thoughts before I move on? Okay. So there's just some key takeaways that we have. Let me go back. Oh. Okay, so flavors are attracting youth to vaping products. Product designs are constantly changing. 1 in 5 Wisconsin students report using e-cigarettes. Ebola outbreak shows that e-cigarettes can pose short-term health effects, and long-term health effects still remain uncertain. And then regulation for e-cigarettes are not adequate to combat youth vaping. And then here's a couple of resources that we wanted to provide for you guys. A couple are websites that show you like quitting lines and some more information on the lung injury, Governor Everst's letter to the school, the Surgeon General report, and then the tobacco is changing. So if you guys want to venture deeper into these resources, you're more than welcome, and I can send an email out with the link as well. And then finally, here's our contact info. You can contact either Annika or I if you have any other questions about today's webinar, or if you thought of questions after today's webinar, we'll be able to ask the presenters. And then please follow us on our social media accounts. We run a Facebook, a Twitter, and an Instagram page. Facebook, we post every Monday, every Thursday, and every Saturday. So again, those are filled with even more data and facts about tobacco usage in general. And then Annika is also going to put a survey in the chat. So if you guys don't mind taking this post-webinar survey for us, just so we can kind of get an idea of what was learned and then how the information is going to be disseminated among the communities that you guys work with. And that is the end of our webinar. And I want to thank all of our presenters for presenting today and making time to talk about e-cigarette usage and youth, as well as you guys for attending. So thank you.
Thanks for having